23rd to 30th June 1944. For the next several days, the 27th Infantry Division probed and maneuvered and attacked at Hell's Pocket, Death Valley, and Purple Heart Ridge. On 28th of June, Army Major General George W. Griner, who had been quickly sent from Hawaii upon the relief of Ralph Smith, took over command of the division, so Jarman could revert to his previous assignment as Garrison Force Commander. The 106th marked the day by eradicating the last enemy resistance in the spot that had caused so much grief. Hell's Pocket. The 2nd Marine Division meanwhile inched northward toward the town of Garapan, meeting ferocious enemy resistance. Tipo Pali was now in 6th Marines' hands. The 8th Marines encountered 4 small hills strongly defended by the enemy. Because of their size in comparison with Mount Tapachau, they were called Pimples. Each was named after a battalion commander. Painfully, one by one, they were assaulted and taken over the next few days. Near Garapan, about 500 yards to the front of the 2nd Marines' lines, an enemy platoon on what was named Flame Tree Hill was well dug in, utilizing the caves masked by the bright foliage on the hill. The morning of 29th June, a heavy artillery barrage as well as machine gun and mortar fire raked the slopes of the hill. Then, friendly mortars laid a smoke screen. This was followed by a pause in all firing. As hoped, the enemy raced from their caves to repel the expected attack. Suddenly, the mortars lobbed high explosives on the hill. Artillery shells equipped with time fuses and machine gun and rifle fire laid down another heavy barrage. The enemy, caught in the open, was wiped out almost to a man. To the right, the 6th Marines mopped up its area and now held the most commanding ground, with all 3 of its battalions in favorable positions. In fact, since replacement drafts had not yet arrived, the 2nd Marine Division had all 3 of its infantry regiments deployed online. Thus, it was necessary for its commander, Major General Watson, to organize a division reserve from support units. The pressure on manpower was further illustrated by the fact that, in this difficult terrain, 8 stretcher bearers were needed to evacuate 1 wounded Marine. In addition, there was, of course, the deep-seated psychological and physical pressure from the constant day-after-day, close combat. Everyone on the island felt the weight of fatigue settling down. On the 4th Division front, the drive forward was easier, but its left flank had to be bent sharply backward toward the 27th Infantry Division. By nightfall on 28th of June, the Marine Division's lines formed an inverted L with the 23rd Marines and part of the 165th Infantry facing north, while the rest of the Army Regiment and 2 battalions of the 24th Marines faced west. This strange alignment was a focus of attention when each battalion was issued its nightly overlay from Corps headquarters, showing the lines of the Corps at that time, so that friendly fire from artillery and supporting Navy destroyers would not hit friendly troops. Once again, enemy planes raided, hitting both the airfield and anchorage. As usual, enemy night patrols were active. The end of the saga of Nafutan Point, way to the rear, had come the day before, 27th June. The Japanese breakout had left almost no fighting men behind there. Accordingly, the battalion of the 105th Infantry at last overran the area after enduring a final banzai charge. The soldiers found over 500 enemy bodies in the area, some killed in the charge and some by their own hand. D+15, 30th June, marked a good day for the Army. After fierce fighting, the 27th Infantry Division finally burst through Death Valley, captured Purple Heart Ridge, and drew alongside the 8th Marines. Holland Smith gave due recognition. No one had any tougher job to do. The gaps on the flanks with the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions were now closed. In doing so, the Army had sustained most of the 1,836 casualties inflicted upon it since D-Day. The 4th Marine Division, however, had suffered 4,454 casualties to date, while the 2nd Marine Division had lost 4,488 men. The Corps front now ran from Garapan, past the 4 Pimples, to the 4th Marine Division's left boundary. Here, it ran sharply northward to Hill 700. From there, it ran to the east coast. Central Saipan was in American hands. Most of the replenishment supplies had been unloaded. The enemy had begun withdrawing to his pre-planned final defensive lines. The Army's official history summed up these days' costly victories this way. The battle for Central Saipan can be said to have come to a successful end. D+16, D+19, 1st-4th July. Now Holland Smith turned his attention to operation plans to drive through the northern third of Saipan and bring the campaign to a successful, albeit a bloody, conclusion. His next objective line ran from Garapan up the west coast to Tanapag and then eastward across the island. Past Tanapag near Flores Point, the 2nd Marine Division would be pinched out and become the Corps Reserve. That would leave the 27th Infantry Division and the 4th Marine Division to assault General Saito's final defenses. The easiest assignment during this period fell to the 4th Marine Division on the east coast. It advanced 3,500 yards against light opposition, veering to its left, ending on 4th of July with its left flank some 2,000 yards north of Tanapag, right on the west coast. As usual, what looked like light opposition to General Schmidt in his divisional CP looked very different to that tired, tense lieutenant who described a painfully typical rifle platoon situation on D+16. I took the rest of my men and we proceeded, very cautiously, to comb the area. It was a terrible place. The rocks and creepers were so interwoven that they formed an almost impenetrable barrier. Visibility was limited to a few feet. After what had happened to my wounded sergeant, the atmosphere of the place was very tense. We located some rock crevices we thought the Japs might be in, and I tried calling to them in our Japanese combat phrases to come out and surrender. This proved fruitless, and it let the Japs know exactly where we were, while we had no idea of their location. Then I tried to maneuver our flamethrower man into a position where he could give the crevice a blast without becoming a sitting duck target himself. Because of the configuration of the ground, this proved impossible. Right about now, there was a shot off to our left. We started over to investigate and all hell broke loose. A Jap automatic weapon opened up right beside us. We all hit the deck automatically. No one was hit, for a change, but we couldn't spot the exact location of the weapon, as usual. I called to the man who'd been over on the left flank. No answer. What had happened to him? At this point, more enemy fire spattered around the small group of Marines. The source seemed to be right on top of them, so the lieutenant told 2 of his men to throw some grenades over into the area he thought the fire was coming from, about 20 feet away. Under cover of that, the Marines worked a rifleman forward a couple of yards to try to get a bead on the Japanese, but he was unable to spot them, and the enemy fire seemed to grow heavier. Now the lieutenant began to get very worried. Here we were, completely isolated from the rest of the company. Only half a dozen of us left. Our flank man had disappeared, and now we were getting heavy fire from an uncertain number of Japs who were right in our middle and whom we couldn't locate. Some of the men were getting a little jittery, I could see, so I tried to appear as calm and cool as I could, although I didn't feel that way inside. I decided to move back to the other end of the hilltop and report to our company commander on the phone. If I could get his okay, I would then contact another one of our platoons for reinforcements, and we could move back into this area and clean out the Jap pocket. Pressing hard against the Japanese defenses constantly resulted in these kinds of face-to-face encounters. 3 days later, D+19, Lieutenant Colonel Chambers observed a memorable act of bravery. 3 of our tanks came along the road. They made the turn to the south, and then took the wrong turn, which took them off the high ground and into a cave area where there were literally hundreds of Japs, who swarmed all over the tanks. We were watching and heard on the radio that the lieutenant who commanded the tanks was hollering for help, and I don't blame him. They had formed a triangle and covered each other with the coaxial guns as best as they could. The commanding officer of the 1st Battalion, 25th Marines, Lieutenant Colonel Hollis U. Mustaine was nearest the crisis. Chambers went on. Mustaine's executive officer was a regular major by the name of Fenton Me. Musty and I were together, and when radio operators told us what was going on, Musty turned to me and said, "Get some people there and get those tanks out." Me turned around to his battalion CP, who were all staff people. He just pointed and said, "Let's get going." He turned and took off. I can still see his face. He figured he was going to get killed. They got there and the Japs pulled out. This let the tanks get out, and they were saved. It was one of the bravest things I ever saw people do. Chambers also noted that, by D+19, out of 28 officers and 690 enlisted men in his rifle companies at the start of the campaign, he now had only 6 officers and 315 men left in those companies. Counting his headquarters company, he had just 468 men remaining of the battalion's original total strength of 1,050, so one rifle company simply had to be disbanded. The grim toll was repeated in another battalion, which had had 22 out of 29 officers and 490 enlisted men either killed or wounded in action. Next to the 4th Marine Division was the 27th Infantry Division in the center of the line of attack. It, too, had a far easier time than in the grinding experiences it had just come through. Its advance also veered left and was against negligible resistance, with the enemy in full flight. Thus, it reached the west coast, pinching off the 2nd Marine Division and allowing it to go into reserve. There was a different story in the 2nd Marine Division zone of action at the beginning of this period. On 2nd July, Flame Tree Hill was seized, and the 2nd Marines stormed into Garapan, the second largest city in the Mariana Islands. What the regiment found was a shambles. The town had been completely leveled by naval gunfire and marine artillery. The official marine history pictures the scene. Twisted metal rooftops now littered the area, shielding Japanese snipers. A number of deftly hidden pillboxes were scattered among the ruins. Assault engineers, covered by riflemen, slipped behind such obstacles to set explosives, while flamethrowers seared the front. Assisted by the engineers, and supported by tanks and 75mm self-propelled guns of the Regimental Weapons Company, the 2nd Marines beat down the scattered resistance before nightfall. On the beaches, suppressing fire from the LVT-As of the 2nd Armored Amphibian Battalion silenced the Japanese weapons located near the water. Moving past the town, the 2nd Marine Division drove towards Flores Point, halfway to Tanapag. Along the way, with filthy uniforms, stiff with sweat and dirt after over 2 weeks of fierce fighting, the Marines joyfully dipped their heads and hands into the cool ocean waters. With the other 2 divisions already having veered their attack to the left and reached the northwest coast, the 2nd Marine Division was now able to go into Corps Reserve, as planned, on 4th July. Holland Smith, seeing the end in sight on Saipan, wanted this division rested for the forthcoming assault on neighboring Tinian Island. The Japanese, meanwhile, were falling back to a final defensive line north of Garapan. The American attack of the preceding weeks had not only shattered their manpower, their artillery, and their tanks, but the enemy also was desperate for food. Many of them had been so pressed for provisions that they were eating field grass and tree bark.